megastorm Irma. I would like to commend the Honorable Prime Minister for providing the leadership and being proactive in evacuating many of our citizens who would have been in harm's way had they stayed in Ragged Island, Inagua, Acklands, Crooked Island, Long Key, Meguana, and Bimini. And so I thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I would be grateful for you to allow me to extend condolences to the family of Miss Mary Smith, who just happened to be the woman we call Aunt Mary, the oldest woman in the community of Black Point, who is being buried this Sunday. And I know the family because that's my family, Mr. Speaker. And so, condolences to Francis and Alan and all of the rest of the family. You know, when I was growing up, we had a joke. Mary's husband, we used to call him Bulla. And he had 12 children. And each one of his sons was named after one of the famous family. So you have Rubian, Simeon, and the whole crew. And so, Mr. Speaker, I extend condolences to that family and extend my apologies for not being able to attend the funeral on Sunday, as I will be traveling on the nation's business. I would also like to extend condolences, Mr. Speaker, to the family of Miss Idina Burrows, a longtime, strong BTC, Betelco employee and head of the Betelco Union. I'd come to know Mrs. Burrows when I was just a young man in the Bahamas Union of Teachers. And it was during the turbulent 80s, Mr. Speaker, when the two unions that not caused the most problems, but were most active, were the BUT and the BCPOU. So I've had the great opportunity and privilege to work beside this great woman who sacrificed for the Bahamian people and for the best in this country. And to her husband and the entire family from Baratari, I extend condolences to you. Mr. Speaker, I'm here because of the great constituency of Garden Hills. And I take this opportunity to thank them once again for allowing me to represent them in this place. I constantly remind them, Mr. Speaker, that they are my inspiration, and they are my guide. They are the reason why I'm in this hallowed place. And I say to the many residents and voters in the area, thank you for giving me a second opportunity to do your work and to represent your aspirations and dreams. And today, as I once again publicly pledge my support and unflinching commitment, and to remind them that I will do my best, my uttermost best, not to let you down. That I will represent you today and every single day until the next general election. To date, Mr. Speaker, in Garden Hills, we have successfully sponsored a 2-week summer program for students. They all participated in both academic and social classes, sports and junkanoo, costume making, sewing of their school uniform, just in a period of 2 weeks. For the adults in Garden Hills, Mr. Speaker, they said that they would not be left out. So they too were engaged in sewing, so as to improve, had to go and to create their own small business opportunities. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, all of the street signs that had fallen by the way have now been erected. And I say to the resident in Garden Hills that where we have placed the poles without the printed signs, I have the assurance from the Ministry of Works that the signs will be made so that they could be placed, so that every street in Garden Hills will have a sign and or a directional information on every street corner. Thanks to the Ministry of Public Works, many of the drains have been unclogged. But I also note that the drain on Family Street and on Kim's Crescent is yet to be completed. Mr. Speaker, when the hurricane was approaching us in the Bahamas, we made sure that sandbags and sand was available to the residents. Tops to some individuals were distributed because they had not yet received the promised repairs from Hurricane Matthew. Bulk garbage and other waste was removed from the constituency, from various areas in the constituency. Trees were trimmed as we continue on our journey for the massive pre-Christmas cleanup that we will sponsor. As usual, Mr. Speaker, I've asked the Ministry of Environment to assist me with the removal of derelict vehicles so that we can keep our communities clean. On the mega scale, Mr. Speaker, we have caused the people's government to listen to our cries and our concerns about the ill-advised plan by the former government to construct the National Post Office right in the middle of the most quiet community in the Garden Hills constituency. Yes, Angliston, we pledge to listen to the people and the residents of Blue Hill Estates. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. The Member of Parliament for Angliston said one of the tenets that is laid out by the Free National Movement was that we would listen to the people. And listen to the people we are doing, Mr. Speaker. Just ask the people who live in Blue Hill Estates, who were firstly surprised that the government was erecting a high-impact post office in their community without mentioning one word to them. Not one word. The government went as far, Mr. Speaker, as to say this was a PPP. And they told the people of Blue Hill Estates that the government was not involved in the project. The MP at the time said he was surprised that the project was going on. Lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, lo and behold, I'm informed that the government of the Bahamas and the former government, the government under the PLP spent in excess of $2 million on this project. Yet, they had the will to tell the people of the Bahamas that the government was not involved in the project. Absolutely not. They were all surprised. Mr. Speaker, the Free National Movement continues to demonstrate that we are distinctively different from the PLP. You will never hear any member of the Free National Movement go to the public, for example, and say to the public, this project, the government has no involvement in the project, and the same government, through the Ministry of Finance, is expending millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, the people of Blue Hills, the people of Blue Hill Estates, Mr. Speaker, the people of Blue Hill Estates.
Honorable Member, the Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rum Kingston, South.
Point about this, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
I heard the member attributing words to me that I never said. I just want to clarify. Yes. I was at a meeting with the Blue Hills residents, and I did not tell them, right, that I did not know about any involvement of the government in the project that he's talking about. And if he's conveying that, he was in the meeting.
Mr. Speaker,
Don't.
since the member of Cat Island has raised that point, I was in the meeting in Blue Hill Estates where the member of Parliament for Cat Island, now leader of the opposition, said to the residents in the meeting, this is a PPP. The government,
Public-private partnership.
yes, the government has not expended any money in these contracts.
I never
Exact
said,
words,
point
Mr.
of order, I never said that. Never said that.
The chair recognizes
Never said
the
that.
member for
Mr.
Cat Island.
Speaker, since the member of Parliament is saying,
To the truth.
Honorable members,
Mr. Speaker, since the member of Parliament is saying on the record, the honorable member, that he did not say that the government did not spend any money in that project, Mr. Speaker, I will undertake to provide the House with the newspaper clipping. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, I could get that recording from Cable Bahamas. I just hope I could do that, Mr. Speaker. I just hope. But, Mr. Speaker, oh, I have no problem with drawing it, Mr. Speaker. If the member is now saying that the government expended $2 million in the project, that's fine. I accept that. I have no problem with that. If the member of Parliament is now saying, Mr. Speaker, that the government spent monies in the project.
Dishonest. Right?
honorable members, honorable member for Garden Hills, I would recommend that that you give the undertaking to provide the House with either or both the taping of that meeting and the newspaper report before we.
I take the point. I'm prepared to withdraw that statement until evidence could be provided. But I also want the member to understand that he too is on the record and is suggesting to this House that the government has now spent some money on that project. Mr. Speaker, the government of the Bahamas, the Free National Movement government, is demonstrating very clearly, Mr. Speaker, that we are distinctively different from the PLP. And when we pledge to listen to the people, listening to the people of Blue Hill Estates is what we did. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, the decision to build a post office in the middle of that quaint community has now been rescinded by this government. In Bozine Town, Mr. Speaker, I advise residents that I shall provide you with a report in the shortest period possible time about your land ownership issues. As usual, and consistent with our record, Mr. Speaker, we will deliver on our promise. Unlike the PLP, Mr. Speaker, who in 1992, 2002, 2007, 2012, and again in 2017, Mr. Speaker, went into Bosine Town and made the promise that they would deliver this land. That's what they did, Mr. Speaker.
What?
All those years, and not once have they delivered. Before we left office in 2012, Mr. Speaker, before we left office in 2012, we engaged. Yes, I did. I'm just reminding every single person of the incompetence of the PLP government. That's what I'm doing, Mr. Speaker. When we left office in 2012, Mr. Speaker, we hired a surveyor. The land was surveyed. We agreed on the transfer of land. We agreed, Mr. Speaker. But from 2012 to 2017, absolutely nothing was done. Nothing, Mr. Speaker. That is the difference between us and you. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the public service. Over the years, Mr. Speaker, our public officers have given yeoman service to the people of the Bahamas. They have served in every capacity and every area that affect the life of every person residing in our country, in health, in education, public works, foreign affairs, agriculture, transport, and so on. They implement government policy and programs under sometimes daunting circumstances. And for that, we as a government and as a people in the Free National Movement, we are and we will remain eternally grateful for their resolve, their unflinching commitment to the public, and the service they deliver to our country. Mr. Speaker, many times these individuals make sacrifices that include their families and their personal relationships because they are committed to this country. That is exactly why, Mr. Speaker, sometimes I'm personally offended and totally disgusted when I hear former ministers and their operatives proclaim that the Free National Movement does not care about civil servants and their families. And further, Mr. Speaker, that the PLP is the only party that cares about the Bahamian people. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I contend and will seek to produce empirical and undeniable evidence that the PLP government in the last 5 years embarked on a mission to dismantle and perhaps destroy the public service by creating a parallel public service. A public service, Mr. Speaker, that was properly established and constituted, carefully crafted by former prime ministers beginning with Simonet, Pinley, and Ingram. And I wonder why the legacy of this new PLP is different. I will tell the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, how this PLP ignored rules, simple rules, regulations, and policies, and purely violated these rules for personal self-aggrandizement, political expediency, and pure political gain. How this PLP government, Mr. Speaker, has created a climate of fear and did not permit the professionals in the system to do their jobs, thus creating even more chaos in the system. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, I will demonstrate to the Bahamian people that the Free National Movement is distinctively different from the PLP, because we know we are the people's government, and we are about the people's service and issues. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I can say today that we are in a better place. And all the members opposite know it. But I guess it's their duty to muddy the water. Mr. Speaker, I talked about creating a parallel system of governance. This parallel system, Mr. Speaker, was created through the widespread use of hiring persons on contract at all levels, notwithstanding the policy that persons are hired on contract when their skills and experiences cannot be found in the service. This includes, Mr. Speaker, but certainly is not limited to the return of public officers who are paid their salaries, which were more than their retiring salaries, plus a pension, and a gratuity at the end of their pension. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, a retired permanent secretary who retires from the service making $70,000 a year. Okay? So this permanent secretary that is retired makes $70,000 a year, receives a pension of, and if they've served for 10 years, their pension would be $70,000 a year. Full pension.
Full pension.
So they receive a pension of 70, they retire at 70,000.
Yeah.
They receive a pension of 70,000, and they receive, for example, a 2-year contract from the government. At the end of the 2-year contract, they must now also receive a gratuity of at least 15%. And so, Mr. Speaker, as a former public officer, I feel and know what's happening in the system. I was a part of that system. So when I see the members opposite coming here, jumping up and saying, oh, you all don't care about the civil servants, you all doing this and you all doing that, I just remind them, Mr. Speaker, that in 2008, the government of the Bahamas decided that the government of the Bahamas decided that you just could not have both. You either had a pension or a gratuity, or you paid the difference. But the PLP sought to change that, Mr. Speaker. But that was their policy. And I'll come back to that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I indicated earlier to this honorable House, how the PLP had ballooned the public purse between December 2016 to May 2017. I said at the time, Mr. Speaker, that the PLP increased the public purse by $10,149,738 for that period. I repeat, between December 2016 and May 2017, the PLP ballooned the public purse by $10,149,738. But, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition jumped up and he said I was wrong. I want to apologize to the leader of the opposition. I was wrong. I accept the fact that I was wrong. What I did not say, Mr. Speaker, at that time was that the actual expenditure should have been $16,531,738. $16 million, Mr. Speaker. Because I did not include, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I did not include, Mr. Speaker, the 1,700 workers, plus workers, because I still can't get exactly the numbers. But so far I know that there are 1,700 workers that I did not include in my original count. And the reason I could not include them, Mr. Speaker, is because these persons were sent to work. They were not given a letter. They were not told where they ought to go and what they ought to do. So when the Member of Parliament asked earlier whether we had terminated these contracts, as I said to her in a previous meeting, when you issue a contract for 3 months and it's April, May, and June, at the end of June, there's a legitimate expectation that those contracts would have come to an end. Particularly, and you would know, Mr. Speaker, that if you have the power to issue contracts and you only issue them for 3 months, and you continue and you realize how important those 3 months are to your personal existence in the political arena, it lays the impression, Mr. Speaker, that you are only issuing contracts to secure votes. And after the vote, Mr. Speaker, you go about your way, you are gone. Mr. Speaker, these individuals sat around the cabinet table. They could have made those individuals, they could have confirmed those individuals, they could have given them 1-year contracts, they could have done anything. They chose to give them 3 months contract. And now they come here, Mr. Speaker, and now they come here and are pretending that they don't know what had happened or what should happen to these individuals. That is disgraceful, Mr. Speaker. That is dishonest.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Ingliston.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm invoking your discretion. The member is attributing to me some motive, and I think it's in the rules, an improper motive, and saying that as a result of assertions made in this Parliament, I am behaving in a disgraceful manner. And Speaker, I want the member to advise us. Speaker, I'm the one that spoke to it. I'm the only one in here that spoke today, ladies and gentlemen, man. Could you let me speak to the Speaker, man? What happened? Lord. Disruptive, man. Behave. Hey. Speaker, I'm wondering whether the member would advise, because he set a standard now, whether this was a similar motive under the Free National Movement when they hired 300 workers for 3 months before the 2002 elections, I think it was. Was it a similar strategy, or was it their intent to regularize people? Because if that's what, I need to know whether he's saying, if he's using that as his benchmark to ascertain what our intentions were in this particular situation.
In the Free National Movement government from 2007 to 2012. What I do know, Mr. Speaker, is that we had a 52-week program. A 52 weeks program, Mr. Speaker. And it was a program that was clearly defined, and everybody was given a letter. And at the end of the 52 weeks, Mr. Speaker, and this is going to be another point I'm going to raise to show how we are different from you. Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, what I know is the Free National Movement, the Free National Movement had a 52 weeks program. Every single person who worked on that program was given a letter, was told at the beginning of the letter what you were going to do, and for 52 weeks you were employed at the government. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I remember clearly at the end of 2012 when we lost. The government came into office. And then what they said to the 52 weeks program, you remember the complaint? The government spent all this money on these people. We are letting them go, and they fired every last one.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island.
Not true.
When we do it, the contract finishes.
Honorable members,
How come, man? How come? How come when the contract ends,
You can't sit in their chair and disrupt you.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, no, I ain't been Mr. Speaker, I'll wait till they're quiet, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I did not include when I said that the government, the former government, had ballooned the treasury. I did not include, Mr. Speaker. I did not include, Mr. Speaker, the 151 immigration workers in that count. Neither did I include, Mr. Speaker. Neither did I include, Mr. Speaker. No, they did not. They were not included in the $10 million that I thought you had ballooned the Treasury by. Yes. Neither did I include, Mr. Speaker, the 123 customs officers that were hired. And, Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to pause right there about those customs officers and immigration officers. Mr. Speaker, I saw this morning, and before I get to that, Mr. Speaker, it is unthinkable, Mr. Speaker, that a responsible government would take individuals off the street and place them in a space that is extremely as sensitive as customs and immigration is, without having regard for a check, a simple check, a simple vetting, Mr. Speaker. I am told by the professionals in the service, Mr. Speaker, that they advised the government not to take this course, not to do it. But the class started for customs the Monday morning, and persons were advised up to the Sunday night. You in that class. Go in the class. Sunday night. Having absolutely no regard, Mr. Speaker, for the public service. And so, Mr. Speaker, the result of that was that some individuals who were placed in that program, even though they had successfully completed the course, could not be recognized as customs officers and immigration officers. They are now called casual workers. I had an occasion this morning, Mr. Speaker, to speak to one such individual who brought me the certificate and said to me he wanted me to explain to him why, after successfully completing this customs course, he is now called a casual worker. The PLP, Mr. Speaker, cares about the public service. They want to know, and particularly the member of Angliston. Particularly, Mr. Speaker, you heard the member of Parliament for Angliston this morning on her feet, talking about how many persons were going to be dismissed by the government, and she had this deep concern about what was happening to the Bahamian people. Well, Mr. Speaker, she had an opportunity, and every single member officer had an opportunity to deal with this matter, Mr. Speaker. Let me read in the record what the certificate says. Issued by the government of the Bahamas. Issued to an innocent Bahamian. With the expectations that after completing the course, that person would be regarded as a customs officer. And so when I say that the PLP sought to dismantle, destroy, and deceive the public service, this is a clear example of it, Mr. Speaker. It says this person, I took the name out so you can't see it, has successfully completed the course of study for basic training with the Bahamas Customs and Excise Department, and has met the requirements for graduation to the rank of Custom Revenue Officer. Wow. This is a government certificate that he has. Wow.
And he's a casual worker.
But, Mr. Speaker, this person cannot be a customs officer in accordance with the rules. Mr. Speaker, the man, Mr. Speaker,
No, the explaining. No. People want to know what happened. They're explaining what you left us in. And now you sit there and say, fix it. We will fix it. We will fix it.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I hear the member of Parliament for. Mr. Speaker, I hear the member of Parliament and the next proposed leader of the PLP. She says, fix it. But I want to say to my former boss and the Honorable Minister for Angliston. She was my former boss. Yes, I've said to the customs persons that I would do all in my power to fix it, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, forget it. But Mr. Speaker, the member of Parliament for Angliston is an accomplished and distinguished lawyer. Oh, yeah. And she knows full well that the Ministry of Public Service cannot dictate to the Public Service Commission, and that they are an independent body, and that we cannot dictate to them and tell them what to do. And so, Mr. Speaker, I was only speaking to the lack of care and concern about the Bahamian people, and how we come into this place and we enjoy the theater of this place, and we try to tell the Bahamian people about all these good things that we are doing and we'd like to do. But yet, Mr. Speaker, when you sit around that cabinet table, Mr. Speaker, and you make the determination that you do not have the courage, you don't have the will to issue a letter to a worker that you, as the government, feel that it's more expedient for you to say to persons, I'm going to send you to work. I'm not going to put it on the record. I'm going to pretend you do not exist. I'm just going to pretend that you are going to work. And then you come into this place. And then you send a different message and a different signal to these individuals. You then build up something in the community that causes the kinds of problems and concerns, confusion, the expectation, the legitimate expectation, Mr. Speaker, from these individuals. High hopes, Mr. Speaker. And many individuals who participate in these courses, in these exercises, both customs and immigration, we have not paid some of them as yet. We cannot. Because the Public Service Commission is saying to us, these are the standards we require so that these persons could be employed in the service. That's all a responsible government ought to do. You have no regard for our borders. You have no regard for the collection of our revenue. And many of these individuals, Mr. Speaker, many of them are good workers. I saw a few of them. Of course, but do it right. Do it so that it does not humiliate the Bahamian people. Do it so that the expectation and legitimate expectation of these individuals are reached. Mr. Speaker, this increase by the PLP has placed public pressure not only on the finances of the Bahamas, but on the human resources of the Bahamas. And Mr. Speaker, you know, the member of parliament would recall, and
That's what we do.
member of parliament has asked us to fix it. That was their mantra in 2007 and 2008. Everything was fix it. And like we did, and like I did in 2007, when I went to the Ministry of Housing and met 80 contract workers, we fixed them all. We will fix it again. We've cleaned up your mess. We've cleaned up your mess before. Mr. Speaker, we've cleaned up your mess before. We are committed to doing this because we are the people's government.
They love us. They love us. We gotta fix them. We're gonna fix it.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, what we intend to do with these individuals is very clear. You know, Mr. Speaker, that an audit is ongoing in all of the ministries. We were directed, and each minister was directed by the Prime Minister to do an audit in his ministry, to make a determination of all of these individuals, to see who has attended work, to see what their functions are, to look at how they are performing in the system, to look at the contracts. And so what we propose to do, Mr. Speaker, is very clear. What any humanitarian government will do. We will examine these individuals and make a determination based on merit. We're not interested in what color they were wearing.
No.
We're not interested, Mr. Speaker, in getting a vote just before the election. We are saying that these are Bahamian people.
Amen.
They are working. They need the work. And if they qualify and if they are there on merit, we will continue to engage them. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I was always curious, Mr. Speaker, as to what Senator Fred Mitchell meant when he said during the campaign, you better vote for us if you want to keep your jobs. I was curious about that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was curious about that. Mr. Speaker, that gave me the impression, and it certainly leaves the impression, that Senator Mitchell was saying to these contract workers, if you want to continue your job that we didn't give you a letter for, that we hired you for 3 weeks for, vote PLP. And we didn't give you no money for it either. Didn't pay. Getting paid after the election. But, Mr. Speaker, I am guided by the Bahamian people. I am pleased that the Bahamian people, one thing they know when they're trying to flounder.
Yes, yes, yes.
They know that. So they took the job. They took the job. Voted F&M. They voted F&M because they knew that if the F&M got the opportunity, they would be treated differently. They took to our slogan, it is the people's time. And Mr. Speaker, we will demonstrate to those individuals who are performing in a professional way on the job that it is indeed the people's time. Mr. Speaker, I note, Mr. Speaker, that there was some mention this morning, Mr. Speaker, about what my colleague and the Member of Parliament for South Beach said in a meeting that he had with some workers who are called contract workers, Mr. Speaker. And I noticed the media took to the point that, and I hear some officers refer to the point that we are firing these individuals. But Angleston, all you had to do is read what the minister said. And he said, and what he said was, Mr. Speaker, he said that we will hire we are watching your performance, and we will engage you based on merit. I think that's what the Bahamian people want. They want value for their money. He was very clear, Mr. Speaker. He said it over and over and over again. Mr. Speaker, like I said, it's... Mr. Speaker, it's not like what the PLP did, and I referred to it earlier. When they came to office in 2012, they met scores of individuals working on the 52 weeks program. They met just over 100 persons working in urban renewal. 2 weeks after they get the job, gone, because all there's F&M.
I'm walking the office and tell people go home.
Gone.
Go home.
This is a group that now claims they love the Bahamian people. The scores of individuals who were fired, I guess they were not Bahamians.
Need a fresh breeze. Merit. Qualifications and merit. Merit. If you perform in the state. Merit. No colors.
Mr. Speaker.
No colors.
Mr. Speaker, what I sought to outline is basically how the PLP government
Keep going.
has demoralized.
Real leader stick. Where's the leader? Has he abandoned ship?
Now,
Oh, he's a good man.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the only comment that I'm going to make about that is me and the member of parliament from Exuma goes way back. We go way, way back.
He's a good man. He's a good man.
I had the distinct honor and privilege on my first teaching assignment to teach in Forbesville, Exuma, and I believe the MP was in the class of that group.
Very well. Very well. Very well.
So I know, Mr. Speaker, we have a common purpose. We're both from Exuma. And I've already told him, Mr. Speaker, that he's going to get all the votes from Exuma. And I was disappointed that the person who wanted to be the leader didn't take him when she was canvassing in Exuma. I think. I've already told my MP from Exuma that I hear some things, but who will oppose him, but I'm not going to get in that. I know he's from Exuma, and we will collectively ensure that an Exumian is in the post. and so, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to engage in their business, but even to say that Exumans will be proud in 2022 or 23 when the MP will be the leader of the PLP. Mr. Speaker,
Even us got hopes in you. Even us got hopes in you. Even us.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the point I was making about Mr. Speaker, the point I was seeking to make about persons employed or engaged in government is that we should never be careless with our young people. They are our future. So whether there's a real opportunity to engage them or not, we should be absolutely upfront with these individuals. We should not play games with their lives. We should not, Mr. Speaker, use these individuals as pawns in the political game. They are our brothers and sisters. They are our brothers and our sisters. Every day that I walk in the Ministry of Public Service, Mr. Speaker, there are at least 3 individuals who I have to greet and who say to me every single morning, there's no way I could get to the public service without seeing them. No, but every day. And every day the same question is, Mr. Roll, I never got a letter. What you all going to do with us? That's the humiliation, Mr. Speaker, that I do not think these Bahamians deserve. And you cannot come to this place, Mr. Speaker, being holier than thou, saying how much you love the Bahamian people and how much you appreciate the Bahamian people. And to treat them in this way, to humiliate them, Mr. Speaker, is ungodly.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angleston.
The member is attributing to me improper motives. I'm getting the rule. No, I'm addressing the speaker. Speaker, the member is attributing to me an improper motive. Yes, it's rule. Yes, it's again the rule. Okay. Rule 33. And it is the rule, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to find quickly the Speaker, you are familiar. No.
Remember that this morning?
Mr. Speaker, I'm talking to the Speaker. The Speaker has recognized me, you know. The Speaker has recognized me. Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, Mr. Speaker, the rules do not allow another member to attribute. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, Mr. Speaker, the rule does not allow a member to attribute to another member an improper motive. Are you familiar with that rule, Mr. Speaker?
Honorable member,
Just let the Speaker
when you discover the rule, you can return to the point.
Speaker.
I'm giving the same treatment that I gave this morning.
No, okay.
Okay?
I'll wait
It's the
till
same
it's
treatment.
No problem.
Mr. Speaker, my final point about the public service, Mr. Speaker, is, Mr. Speaker, that we care about contract workers. They are Bahamians. Many of them have worked in the public service for many, many years. And so one of the first things I did, Mr. Speaker, was to direct the permanent secretary in the public service to find and examine every single officer in the service who have been engaged in the service for 10 years or more, and to put in place steps where they could be permanent immediately. Additionally, Mr. Speaker,
The chair recognizes the honorable member.
Familiar with, but I found it. I mean, it's Rule 33:17, imputations of improper motives and personal reflections on members shall be dealt with by the chair under the rules relating to order in the House and in committee. Mr. Speaker, I'm relying on this. The member is. We have raised the point. Pardon me, Speaker. Speaker.
Indicate
Yes, sir.
the improper motive.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Because it looks as if some people in here want to usurp your function. We will not allow that. We will not allow that. We will not allow that, Speaker.
Think some of you learning?
Mr. Speaker, the member is suggesting that when the point was raised this morning about the interests of the people who are in the system, not regularized, some who have been terminated, that there is some I'm assuming he's speaking to me because I'm the only one that spoke on this side, that I raised those issues as some pretense in terms of the interests of these people. And I think that's highly offensive, and I expect better, Mr. Speaker, the member for Garden Hills. Make your point, man, but you don't have to come up with this sort of demeaning process of how you express it. Speaker, he's quite aware that the Free National Movement government hired 300 people before the general elections. For 90 days, you know, and
Honorable member.
I won't take advantage, Mr. Speaker, but I apologize, Mr. Speaker. But on that point, I want to say the member should do better. He should not bring himself to that level and expressing and attributing to me that kind of improper approach as to when I speak in this house.
Because we know you're quite genuine.
He should do better.
Honorable member for
You should do better.
Garden Hills.
Speaker. Miss-
3317.
Mrs. Speaker, I'm happy to have the Member of Parliament for Angleton in this place. She is extremely good. She just reminded me, though, that she just reminded me, Mr. Speaker, of how demeaning this process must be, how humiliating this process must be to those individuals who they sought to employ. That's who were humiliated by this process. Those individuals, Mr. Speaker, those are the individuals who I see every day, who come to the public service, who want an answer every single day, who feel humiliated that the government of the Bahamas has put them in this place. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Free National Movement has put in place the mechanism to ensure that serving contract workers who are doing a good job will be placed on the PNP. I started by saying, Mr. Speaker, that we are different from them. Compare and contrast this, Mr. Speaker, to what the former Minister of Education did. I have story after story in public service, Mr. Speaker, how the Minister of Education told these, according to them, 600 or 800 persons, but I can't make you PNP because I ain't hiring you. I did not hire you. I got to fix up the people who I hire. That is how they operated policy in the Ministry of Education under the PLP. Never, ever being concerned about the quality of life of these individuals. Only being concerned about the persons they brought in, the political persons they hired. And to have the tenacity and gall to tell these individuals, I can't make you PNP because I didn't hire you. Go and find those people who hire you. Mr. Speaker, that is how the FNM is different from the PLP. And so in short order, Mr. Speaker, many individuals in the public service will be placed on the permanent and pensionable establishment, because that is how that is what we do, Mr. Speaker, in the Free National Movement. We are the people's government, and we act on their behalf, and we do their work. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to say very much about national insurance today. What I will say, though, Mr. Speaker, is what I will say, Mr. Speaker, is that I have directed national insurance to show significant improvement in 3 critical issues. The Free National Movement government is not satisfied with how benefits are paid and how the delays are in place to pay benefits to individuals. They're not satisfied. And so I've mandated national insurance to correct that problem, and I hope that that issue will be corrected before December. Mr. Speaker, I hear the frustration every day from members of the public who call NIB and say they're not answering the telephone. But answering the telephone is a basic service. That is a requirement. And so national insurance has been mandated to do whatever is in its power to fix the phone system, to make it work so that they can respond to the public. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, national insurance must manage our benefits. We're all getting up in age, and we don't want to lose our benefit. And so a strategic plan is in place, and will be implemented in national insurance to ensure the security and safety of our benefits. And in the shortest possible time, the new board of NIB will ensure that that takes place. Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to thank you, sir, to thank the people from Garden Hills, and to remind myself that I'm here to do the people's business. And as a member of the people's government, I urge all of my colleagues to follow the example laid down by my leader, to make sure that the people's government deliver for and on behalf of the people of the Bahamas. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, before we proceed, I wish to take this opportunity also to extend condolences to the Rigby family of Nassau Village constituency on the passing of Mr. Frederick Rigby, and in particular to extend condolences to the mother, Miss Franzetta Ferguson. I intend to visit the family later this evening, but unfortunately I would not be able to attend the funeral on Saturday, because on Saturday I would be attending the funeral of my younger brother. And so I'd also like to take this opportunity to extend condolences to my extended family, the Moultrie family, and the community of Great Inagua, Machu Town, Great Inagua. As many?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to firstly thank God for the opportunity to once again address this Parliament.
Honourable member, just for the record, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
I like the sound of that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much once again. I rise to thank God for the opportunity to again address this Parliament on behalf of the wonderful people of Exumas and Ragged Island who I represent. It gives me great honor to thank Her Excellency, the Governor General, for delivering the speech from the throne. Let me say, though, that the timing of this resolution to thank Her Excellency is incredibly bad form. Her Excellency, radiant, eloquent, and gracious, read the speech in the precincts of Parliament 4 months ago. She braved the hot May sun to deliver this voluminous tome, and this House has failed to conduct itself with the courtesy that should be afforded her office by waiting until the end of the summer for some unbeknown reasons, just to say thank you, let alone debate its contents. Mr. Speaker, this is going to be long.
Yes, boy, go ahead.
I could see that, but I know that you will protect my right because you're a fair speaker. Where I come from, Mr. Speaker, where I come from, we call that no manners. No manners, Mr. Speaker. That's what we call it in Little Exuma. We must do better next time. In any event, it has been 4 months, and most Bahamians like myself are probably still waiting to hear what the plan is from this administration to grow the economy, create jobs, and solve our national challenges like crime. Having said that, I concede that it's only been 4 months, and whilst I would have hoped for more, I acknowledge that it takes time to accomplish much in government. So I'll try not to judge my colleagues too harshly, despite my gut feeling and disillusionment that there really isn't much of a plan to move our country forward. You see, Mr. Speaker, as a newbie member of Parliament, I came here eager to work. I listened to minister after minister talked about how the country was in free fall. So what do? They took a 10-week vacation. And to add insult to injury, we returned to very little legislative agenda. No real bills presented to create jobs, to grow the economy, or address the national challenges facing the Bahamian people. Bahamians are hurting all across our Bahama land. Regarding the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, I don't have time enough to go through all of it promise by promise, as there are scores of them. So I'll stick more closely to things that concern my portfolio as Shadow Minister for Finance, Financial Services and Industry, and what affects more specifically the Family Islands, the Exumas and Ragged Island in particular. I counted nearly 80 promises in the speech from the throne. Some good, some quite vague, some are simply bad ideas, and some I don't get because I'm pretty sure they already exist. On others, that given all that we have been saying inside and outside this Parliament since May 24th, I fail to see how they may be accomplished. For instance, Mr. Speaker, the government says it will endeavor to establish mechanisms to include and engage the Bahamian diaspora in the fulfillment of our national interests and development. This is a good idea. They've repeated it often, haven't really said how they'll do it, but if they can accomplish it even a little, it will be a positive step forward in starting to stem the brain drain the country is experiencing. Let's look at another good idea. And I don't want North Abaco to be so surprised that I'm recognizing another good idea. My critiques are coming. But you do have a few good ideas. I want you to do well for the Bahamian people, so I'm trying to help. Another good thing in the speech is the promise that this administration will provide for a portion of the revenues collected by the islands to be used to address local needs. Now that, Mr. Speaker, is a good idea. Exuma collects tens of millions of dollars in tax revenue for the public treasury, yet its local government only get $400,000 per year. And the chief counselor in Black Point tells me that he's got $3,000 to service 3 airports in terms of keeping the shrubs down on the sidelines. This is simply not acceptable. So this is a good idea. But again, no one has said how this will be done or when. But if they do it, it will truly assist family islands like Exuma in their development. And I'm also ready and willing to give my input, hopefully sooner rather than later. So those were a couple good things. Now let's talk about some stuff that doesn't add up and seem like empty promises. This administration says in the speech it will strengthen the sales and marketing team in our network of Bahamas tourism offices across the United States, Canada, and Europe. Now, to me, I do stand to be corrected. That has not happened. I seem to recall the government reducing staff in these areas and closing some offices. Now, if by strengthening you mean hiring a foreign firm to do what Bahamians were doing before, then okay.
Yes, that's a good point.
I don't agree with it, but it is what it is.
Strengthening inverted commas.
But I have a better idea.
Go ahead, you're on a good.
I got a better idea. How about someone, anyone, displaying some focus on attracting foreign direct investments to our shores. Where is the attention to this? What has been done in the past 4 months? Perhaps we can get a communication of some sort on foreign direct investment. What about the hundreds of millions left in the pipeline? What about the Stocking Island Club in Exuma? Are we nurturing the projects in the pipeline, or are we leaving them on the vine to die? We need some hope. We need some growth. Bahamians are hurting across our Bahama line. I also have an issue generally with the lack of initiatives for family islands. I see where the government says it will launch the rebound of the island of Grand Bahama in accordance with a template of a master strategic plan designed for Grand Bahama. I wonder if this is the plan where a major hotel in Grand Bahama was supposed to be renovated, and the government was going to take a stake in it, and it was going to be open and providing jobs by now. Was it that plan? Because we still don't have any update on it, and I know the hotel still isn't open, it's not being renovated, it's not creating jobs, despite what the Prime Minister said in his national address. So not only is this fantastical plan that I can't locate for Grand Bahama not happening, our family islands have no tangible plans laid out either by this government. Now, just as a reminder, I have eVision 2030 plan for Exuma already laid out. I don't have to do anything, and you don't have to do anything but to help me implement it. And I'll provide each member of the other side a copy to peruse. And I don't mind it becoming the blueprint for the family island development, because I truly believe that the future of our Bahamas lies in our family islands. The Exuma International Airport, Mr. Speaker, is not only a national disgrace, but it is an impediment to further development on the island. Major international developers committed to spending hundreds of millions of dollars are said to be delaying investments in Exuma as a result of a lack of action on this facility. And I am reliably advised. I'm reliably advised that the previous government left funding in place for airports at Exuma, North Eleuthera, and Bimini. We asked the government to get on with it, as this is also an opportunity to create jobs in the construction sector. And whilst we at it, Mr. Speaker, I note where the government says it will also review and give consideration to the ownership of taxi license plates by persons who have been leasing those plates for many years. This is weak tea. Sure, it will help some, but in Exuma, for example, we need new taxi plates, new SD plates. There's an entire economy waiting to blossom. Entrepreneurs not looking for any handout from the government, waiting to get in business or expand their business, to better the lives of their families, create jobs, and improve the tourism product. Remember eVision 2030? It's a solid plan. I'd send you a copy. The government also says it will repeal and replace the Grand Bahama Port Area Investment Incentive Act 2016. It says it will focus on the development of Freeport as an offshore technology hub. It says it will promote Grand Bahama as a primary location for local and international film and television industries. It says it will create incentives to establish a financial services center in Grand Bahama. Grand Bahama, Grand Bahama, Grand Bahama. Now, I like Grand Bahama too. And there is desperate need for recovery in Grand Bahama. And I listened to the cries of Pine Ridge yesterday. And I felt his pain. But I have to tell you, the number of mentions of Grand Bahama and the lack of mentions of family islands has some of us feeling a little left out. Although the government does not say, in fact, it does say, it will renew Family Island Incentive Act to promote inter-island trade. It's pretty vague, and it's nothing new. But I'm listening whenever someone starts to talk about it. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy for this opportunity to talk about the future, because when we listen to members on the other side, there's much focus on the past. But the government says it will establish a one-stop shop to improve the ease of doing business in the Bahamas for entrepreneurs. And like they say in the commercial, there's an app for that as well. The previous administration already had a plan for a small and medium-sized enterprises development agency. We just need to implement it. It already had built-in provisions for ease of doing business on the Family Islands as well. It was called SMETA. Go check it out. You'll see that all this waiting around and complaints of only 4 months and not having had enough time just isn't necessary. We need action. People are hurting across our Bahama land. We need action now. The government also says it will grant tax inducements or incentives to Bahamians comparable to or in line with those given to foreign investors. Is there some discriminatory practice in law in that regard at the moment that I'm not aware of?
No, there's none.
Bahamians aren't getting these now. This one I need help with, because it appears again that we're waiting for something that already exists. The Minister administration says it will enact legislation to ensure that there are standards applied to import products that Bahamians consume, as well as to products manufactured here. Again, I don't get it. A standards bureau already exists. Are we going to create a new one just for fun? And why would we do that? Or are we simply just waiting around? Now, my time is limited, Mr. Speaker. So let's talk a bit about some of the things that I was actually looking forward to that were promised in the campaign, but have by now apparently been abandoned, or let's just say indefinitely delayed. Free tuition and accommodation at UB abandoned, denied, or indefinitely delayed. Scholarships for deserving students abandoned, denied, or indefinitely delayed. Preschool learning for all, especially in the Family Islands, abandoned, no, I mean indefinitely delayed. School facilities for preschoolers in Family Islands, abandoned, or indefinitely delayed. Enhanced provision for specialty education, abandoned, or indefinitely delayed. These are the promises of your government.
4 months. 4 months?
You say you will extend the focus of NHI to secondary and tertiary health care. I haven't heard anything else about it. So maybe that's also abandoned or indefinitely delayed. Oversee the, I'm coming to that. Oversee the incremental implementation of a progressive and functional national catastrophic health insurance program. Again, abandoned or indefinitely delayed. There are 80 of them. I won't go through all of them. But there was a promise to initiate urban development, and I'm happy to hear that we now recognize that urban renewal exists already. But if we were talking about an all-new program, then we're going to have to put that in the indefinitely delayed column as well. Create tax-free zones in the inner city, abandoned, or extensively delayed.
24 months.
Now, Mr. Speaker, this government said that the PLP stole the VAT money. And then their chairman said, we knew that was untrue. But then the minister, my friend from East Grand Bahama, promised a report to this parliament on where the VAT money gone. This also seemed to be a promise that was abandoned or indefinitely delayed. We want to know where the VAT money gone, Mr. Minister, because the minister promised a report. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for protecting my remaining time. I'd like to now turn to the economy. And I refer to communications in the House by the Honorable Minister, the member for East Grand Bahama. Recently, we heard a lengthy presentation by the Minister of Finance, where basically the F&M administration patting itself on the back while giving a report on the IMF Article 4 consultations and the Moody's downgrade review. Mr. Speaker, the communication was essentially a summary of the IMF and Moody's recent assessment of the Bahamian economy and contained a little or no indication of any concrete plans that are under consideration to stimulate economic growth and reduce unemployment. There was no mention of the type of policy stimulus that is needed to jumpstart our major economic sectors of tourism, financial services, and construction. For example, is there a need to refocus tourism marketing in light of the hurricane impact on the southeastern U.S. states and the Caribbean? I know that my friend, the Minister of Tourism, will speak to that. But the communication did not address or adjust financial services model in light of recent decisions of the Bahamas to adopt multilateral approach to common reporting standards of the OECD. Perhaps some focused attention on streamlining and modernizing even more the service of the Registrar General, the Immigration Department, and give focused attention to making the Bahamas a mid-shore jurisdiction rather than keeping the connotations of an offshore tax haven reputation. No such thing from the minister in his communication. The OECD next big initiative is BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting. We must get ahead of this, Mr. Speaker. We must be proactive and modernize our business tax perhaps, leveraging the change to create incentives for real international business domicile in the Bahamas. We have a lot of work to do in financial services, and the government must provide the appropriate support. We don't have time to keep talking about the past, Mr. Speaker. We need appropriate and progressive support for the future. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, the PLP does not support the implementation of income tax.
No, you don't.
And the PLP does not support the implementation of income tax. And we do not equivocate and we do not waffle on the subject.
That's right.
We're not going to introduce that.
We do support, however. And that is why we support, however, a consolidation and maximizing an enhancement of the efficiency of existing taxes and swift reforms to the archaic business license tax. I'm ready to debate that. I'm tired of hearing about the past. But some progressive legislation to move our country forward would be much appreciated.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Speaker, on page 20 of the presentation, the communication of the minister, he seemed to have accepted a link between his budget speech and the Moody's review. I'm a humble boy from Forbes Hill, Little Exuma, Mr. Speaker. But I am not so humble that I cannot throw in, and I told you so, when one is fitting. I told the member for East Grand Bahama that his budget speech was the wrong speech, at the wrong time, in the wrong place. and we barely escaped the downgrade. And only by promising to fire people and to slash budgets. So East Grand Bahama, we barely escaped the downgrade. Only by promising to cut costs and fire people.
That ain't good enough.
So, East Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker, I told you so. Mr. Speaker, I want this administration to do well, Mr. Speaker. I want this administration to do well. But in order to get the Bahamas back on track, we must get the economy growing. The government must outline and implement an aggressive economic growth plan. And in an economy such as this, economic growth can be induced by either government intervention in the short term, by expenditure on meaningful projects, perhaps through PPPs, or by allowing the private sector to spend on projects by providing the appropriate incentives and ensuring the availability of credit. Unfortunately, to date, the government has not seen fit to pursue either path. We need less talk. We need more action. The Bahamian people are hurting all across our Bahama land. Mr. Speaker, let me close by saying a few words about my beloved Ragged Island. The community was hard hit by the vicious ravages of Hurricane Irma, but it's already on its way to recovery. Ragged Islanders are resilient people. You may agree that Ragged Island has produced more professionals per capita than most islands of the Bahamas. When you consider names like Maycock, Monroe, Lockhart, Wallace, Wilson, Moxie, Curling, Pintard, these names throughout our community have made significant contributions. It's a testament to their resilience and their resolve. They are emboldened to rebuild, and quickly. Contrary to some information received by this House, I wish to emphasize that I am advised that the cleanup, including the removal of debris from public places, the removal of animal carcasses to date, has been led and executed by Ragged Islanders, their families, and descendants. And I commend the people of Ragged Island for taking initiative and for having this resolve.
No police, no defense.
I offer thanks to Petty Officer Gary Roll and his team on the ground who are providing security. But they're not participating in the rebuilding process. And they have not yet had the pleasure of receiving the HMBS Lawrence Major with much needed supplies. But I thank all who contributed, especially through Operation Restore Ragged Island, and those wishing to continue to contribute might do so on behalf of the association, and just go on to Facebook and look for Operation Restore Ragged Island.
Doing well.
Residents and the association are in fact interested in actively charting a proposed master plan for the island in hopes of making it a model for recovery in the region.
You could cry for them, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I've spoken. I've spoken with the minister responsible, and whilst we appreciate that restoring power is a huge task and will not happen overnight, we ask the government to set a specific deadline in which it must be completed. Whether it's green or renewable or BPL, we need to know the plan so that we can plan. This is a fishing village. We are in the middle of the crawfish season.
Yes.
And money you got to make, Mr. Speaker. We look forward to cooperating collaborating with the government, with NEMA, the Association of Descendants and Residents, to build back better. I assure the good people of Ragged Island that I will stand with them. I will hold their hands long after the cameras have left the scene. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, I send a special shout out to the 59,000 Bahamians who voted for the PLP, and the thousands more who now wish they did.
That's funny. That's funny. That's a good thing. That's a good way
Mr. Speaker, I send a shout out to the 59,000 Bahamians who voted for the PLP, and the many more thousands who wish they did. We only have 55 months left. So I say in the words of Isaiah, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. And they shall walk and not faint. 55 months or less, Mr. Speaker. 55 months or less. I thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Speaker.
You look good.
And though it took long enough,
You look good.
I support the resolution to thank Her Majesty, the Governor General, for delivering so eloquently the speech from the throne. May God bless and keep her. May God bless Exuma, Exuma Keys, and Ragged Island. And may God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honorable Member. At the end, at the end of your presentation, I almost felt vindicated for bringing in some religion into this chambers. As many?
Wanted to clarify a point made.
Yes. The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm like the member for Ragged Island. I'm new in this place, and we're learning the rules as we go. But he was striving so well. Oh, I can give you the rule. He was striving so well. I didn't want to interfere with him because we sit in a similar position. But I wanted to explain that the Hansard will say to you, we have indicated in Foreign Affairs that the Director General is responsible for a team which is currently working out the modalities of how we're going to engage the diaspora. And you could reflect on that, and you and I can talk about it later. I also want to say to you that before coming into this place this afternoon, I spoke with the commanding officer of the vessel aptly named after the member for Angliston's father, HMBS Arthur Dion Hanna. And he's alongside at Ragged Island as we speak. I just wanted to say that to you.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to hear that we're making some progress in some areas.
We deliver. I've won that one of your questions answered. We deliver.
You know, Mr. Speaker, Ragged Island and Exuma, we over here who are new, we see him as the future. We see him as the future, and we wish him well as he strives toward that end.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with pride and humility, I rise today. I rise today for the people of the great constituency of Yamakro. As I have said before, I am humbled at the opportunity that I have been given as a representative in this honorable chamber and as a representative for the people of Yamacraw. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank Her Excellency Dame Margaret Pinland for her speech from the throne. Dame Margaret continues to be a vision of poise and grace, whose steady presence brings calm in the midst of restlessness. Mr. Speaker, I remember seeing footage of Dame Margaret visiting with the people of Andros after the Hurricane Matthew. Her tender words and careful touch caused smiles to blossom on faces of everyone she met. Mr. Speaker, in moments like these, that kind of goodwill and devotion to one's fellow man is needed more than ever. In this moment, Mr. Speaker, we are faced with challenges that many may find unconquerable. As a small island developing nation, we are at the mercy of climate change, rising sea levels, and temperature. And as a result, the hurricanes that many of us have become all too accustomed to present greater frequency and greater strength. They are monster storms, Mr. Speaker. But when David faced the Philistine Goliath, a giant of monstrous proportions, he did not turn tail and run. He did not desert his fellow Israelis. David stood firm, recounted his values to his king. Faith in God had saved him from the lion and the bear before the giant. Why should he doubt his faith now? Like David, Mr. Speaker, when we are confronted by monsters, we must hold fast to our values. Yesterday, the member for Kalani, Prime Minister the Honorable Hubert Minnis, in a statement on the assistance this government intends to provide to the people of Dominica, reminded the Bahamian people of our values. Christian values defined by compassion, charity, mercy, and love for our neighbors. It is through these spiritual values that our Constitution assures us that the lives of no man, woman, or child should ever be frustrated by deprivation. And Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to thank the leader of the opposition and those present for the opposition for joining with this government to assist the good people of Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I sat and I heard the member, before I proceed, the member of Exuma expressed some concern about the delay in thanking Her Excellency for the speech from the throne. But I quite recall, Mr. Speaker, when we came to this honorable place, and what is customary here, that we would take a recession or a break, a recess or summer recess. There was no objection coming from the other side, from members opposite. So I'm surprised, I'm rather surprised, that today some statements will be made about about us taking the customary break. Mr. Speaker, not only that, when we came back, we were confronted by a monster hurricane, like I said. And I want to commend the leader of the opposition for joining forces, and the member for Exuma for joining forces with the government. Yeah. For joining forces with and recognizing the seriousness of the hurricane, and recognizing that we had to deal with the trauma that was faced by our people, and that we needed to take a break, put certain things in place, and go about doing the business of the country, and then return to this Parliament to thank Her Excellency for a speech from the throne. And so I just wanted to clarify that in all of these things, that Exuma was a willing participant, flying around with the Prime Minister, trying to take care of the business of this country. Yes, sorry, pardon me. Today I stand in wholehearted support of our leader and our efforts to bring comfort to our brothers and sisters in Dominica and also the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not going to reiterate what my leader said and what the leader of the opposition said when he stood here. But there's a recognition, Mr. Speaker, that in assisting our neighbors, that we have an honest and a fierce belief in our obligation toward our Bahamian brothers and sisters. And just like we are extending a token of help to Dominica by sending a vessel, the member for North Abaco has reassured us that we haven't forgotten those islands in the south, and that a ship will be sent there to assist those persons. Oh, it's there now. Thank you very much. Like climate change, we can only face the existential changes of geopolitical and economic inequality, citizen security, and the erosion of trust in our democracy and in our democratic institutions together. Again, Mr. Speaker, in the face of these monstrous challenges, we must be anchored by our values. Her Excellency's speech from the throne did just that, presenting a renewed vision for governance and politics, formed in the sunlight of contemporary realities. Values like accountability, transparency, equality and opportunity, and the respect for our fundamental freedoms, values simply forgotten by the last administration from the very core of this government's agenda. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of State for the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs, I also recognize that these values have set the strategic priorities for my ministry. In my remarks during the 2017-2018 budget debate, I framed the goals and deliverables for the Office of the Attorney General as expressed in the speech from the throne in three strategic priorities. One, systemic reform of the judicial system. Two, enhancing financial services and the business regulatory environment. And three, supporting transparency and accountability in government. And Mr. Speaker, above and beyond these focal points for our own work, the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs, with the leadership of the Attorney General, Senator the Honorable Carl Bettel, and its skilled and hard-working staff, will continue to act as the people's law firm, guardians of the public interest, and authors of legislation. Our four divisions, the Department of Public Prosecutions, the Department of Legal Affairs, the Legislative Drafting Department, and the Law Reform Commission, will work even more efficiently to drive the legislative agenda of the government. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to assure the Bahamian people that the strategic priorities of the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs are clearly reflected in the upcoming legislative agenda. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I tabled two bills, the Interception of Communications Bill and the National Intelligence Agency Bill, each laid before the House with intention of engaging in national consultation. In the face of the escalating challenges of gun violence locally and drug and gun and human trafficking regionally, these bills are meant to equip our law enforcement agencies with the legislative tools necessary to counter international criminal elements that exacerbate crime in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, after hearing of the murder of 8-year-old Eugene Woodside, my heart was broken. Yet another victim of gun violence in this country where guns are not manufactured. The Minister for National Security would have informed the House last week that we can trace an overwhelming majority of the firearms confiscated to outside of our borders. Mr. Speaker, gun runners and drug and human traffickers are not relying on outdated technology to grease the wheels of their deadly cartels. Our law enforcement cannot rely on outdated or entirely absent legislation to defend our citizens. This is why the interception of communication and the National Intelligence Agency bill are necessary. Despite their import, after tabling these bills, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition attempted to create some kind of false equivalence between the way this administration has brought the interception of communications bill forward and the way his administration did. I know I said that I would not dignify the statement by the member for Rumkey, San Salvador, and Cat Island with a response, and I do not intend to do so. Mr. Speaker, instead, I want to make something very clear to the Bahamian people. You know, as do I, that there is a real, palpable, cardinal difference between the way our government and the previous government is handling what came to be known as the spy bill under their watch. All I need to do is remind you of the circumstances under which the bills were originally shrouded. This government is not tabling this bill in the dead of the night, when nobody is watching, months before the election, and we do not need a chorus of citizens and civil society groups to force us into public consultation. Mr. Speaker, we are bringing this bill to the Bahamian people under the disinfecting light of the sun, and we intend to engage with civil society and every citizen in an open and transparent way, proactively, not reactively. Mr. Speaker, how anyone can seek to create this kind of false equivalence is beyond me. The last administration ran an entire intelligence agency without governing legislation. And Mr. Speaker, I know, and I always celebrate the fact that I exercised my constitutional right of freedom of association by way of the We March group. And one of the things that we marched for was for the rule of law, and so that anything that is done in this country of laws will be done by way of laws. So, Mr. Speaker, the National Intelligence Agency, having regard to what it is intended to do, and that is to affect some of the most cherished and fundamental rights that we have, freedom of privacy, movement, whatever have you, will be affected by this legislation or by this institution. And so there should have been some guidelines in terms of legislation that not only the people could refer to if there is some disagreement, but that the court can refer to settle disagreement in this matter. And as the member for North Abaco has just made mention or just said to me, it was conducting itself as a rogue organization, and that's not what we do. That is what happened in Hitler's Germany, and we don't intend to have that in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, to be clear, we are working to remedy the mistakes of the past so that our law enforcement can access the tools of the future. Reforming the process through which a citizen's communications may be intercepted is vital for protecting the privacy of Bahamians, and by requiring independent oversight by the Justice of the Supreme Court, we can avoid constitutional challenges to convictions that rely on the intelligence our law enforcement can gather. Further, Mr. Speaker, as promised, we have tabled a constitutional amendment that will establish the independent office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. this long-awaited bill will ensure that the Department of Public Prosecution will be free from political interference, except with slight exceptions in matters of national security, public policy, or international obligations. This concept of an independent director of public prosecutions is simply common sense. As I have said previously, this is an innovative and contemporary piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I would just like to echo what I had said earlier when these bills were laid. And, you know, prior to the election, this was one of the election promises of my government, that what is common sense in the world, and, pardon? I said my government again? Wow. Sorry. Yes. The last time I said that, my prime minister looked on his shoulder and said, hey, tell them I have you in training. But our government, you know, this is one of the promises that that was outlined in the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker. It was articulated by no less a person than one of our most senior legal luminaries, in the person of Senior Justice Stephen Isaac, who's still sitting, and by he's a former member of the opposition, a man that I respect, revere, and hold in high regard, Mr. Alfred Sayers, QC, and they underline, inclusive of the bar, the necessity for an independent director of public prosecutions. And I could always recall Mr. Sayers indicating what may be an apparent conflict when persons sit in the cabinet, and he said when he had a colleague who was about to be charged, and things went well, but he said it's what appeared to have happened in the circumstances. I quite recall when we had that fiasco with the administrator, I think it was in Megwana, and all of the hullabaloo that surrounded it. It was an attack on the administration of justice, a direct attack. And so what we are doing is we're giving the independent director of public prosecution constitutional underpinning, ensuring that he's paid well, that he has his own staff. So if he decides that he wants to prosecute anybody in this parliament, he can do that. He doesn't have to reference anybody, and he has the protection of the law. Mr. Speaker, in support of our ministry's strategic priority to support transparency and accountability in government, we expect to table a number of bills during this legislative term. And Mr. Speaker, a number of these bills, and there's one that's near and dear to me, and I'm quite certain it's near and dear, it will be near and dear to Angliston, because her father, and I will get to it very shortly, her father played a very important role in a case that concerned some ladies out of Old Bycat Island. When they were arrested, and I was told that they were brought by helicopter from Cat Island after going on farming on some lands. They were sentenced, and I think the Progressive Liberal Party pardoned those ladies. But despite, and I want to jump to this so bad, but despite all of the controversy that surrounded land in the Bahamas, and I'm going to get there, just allow me, Mr. Speaker. Despite all of the controversy and the way that land was used in this country to enslave people, because at one time, we speak about representative government in this place, at one time you voted by how much land you had. Can you imagine? And that is something that we don't teach our people anymore. But there's going to be a compendium of land bills, which will now be transitioning our country into land registration that I will deal with later. But long overdue. Thank you very much, Angliston. And I'm quite certain that we will have the full support of the opposition in this endeavor. But I'll get back to my speech. In support and you know why I say these things? I've heard members opposite said that we took a break and that we were doing absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. But I just want to reiterate, if you would check with the Bahamas Bar Association, this legislation has gone to them for them to have their members review, because they have the experts in the law, and they will be sent Our Prime Minister has a legislative agenda. He said that this will be a consultative government, so we're going to be interactive with civil society, so the bills will go out. Everybody could see them and they could have an opportunity to make their inputs into the bill. But in support, and so we have not been resting on our laurels. And anybody who would say that, I think, is without first checking. That's a strong word to use, disingenuous. It's wrong. In support of our ministry's strategic priority to support transparency and accountability in governance, we expect to table a number of bills during this legislative agenda. Thank you very much. During this legislative agenda. And we spoke a lot about corruption. The Anti-Corruption Commission bill will strengthen the anti-corruption regime in the Bahamas by providing for the establishment of an anti-corruption commission. The Corruption Investigation Bureau bill will transform what is now the Anti-Corruption Unit of the Royal Bahamas Police Force into the Corruption Investigation Bureau, an autonomous body under the Office of the Prime Minister. But what we intend to do, and I'll tell you what's happening now, as we work with civil society, we're going to send them out for everybody to see. There's a paradigm in one of the other jurisdictions where they've morphed these bills into one. And so we intend to morph these bills into one. And what it will do, I've heard persons speak about investment in the Bahamas. Well, I will tell you, and you can check the IDB's website, where they spoke about contracts and doing business in the Bahamas, and how persons have lost confidence both locally and internationally in doing business in the Bahamas. Because it's more than an allegation that everybody wanted a percentage, and they didn't even care about the profits. One of the things that we're intending by introducing these bills is to restore investor confidence in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. One of the bills that I like and I love is the Proceedings of Crime bill, this Proceedings of Crime bill will consolidate, strengthen, and modernize provisions to the prevention, prosecution, and cross-border cooperation of money laundering, terrorism financing, corruption, human trafficking, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. This bill also allows for civil proceedings in cases where a politically exposed person or public officer has been charged with bribery, corruption, stealing by reason of employment, of any number of crimes, allowing the court to make an unexplained wealth order. Now, Mr. Speaker, just allow me, the unexplained wealth order is there was a piece of legislation passed recently in the UK, all around the world. Brazil, Australia, Europe, even in Jamaica, persons are concerned about politicians going into politics, and after a term in office, they go in broke.
Broke like me.
And after a term in office,
I'm not rich.
they're millionaires.
Millionaires, condos all over the world.
That's right. And so what the unexplained wealth order does is that it's not just politicians, but senior public officers. I recall a story that was told to me by a very reputable attorney. And he would tell me about an individual who worked in government. And there was no way that their salary, if they'd saved it all their lives, could have caused them to accumulate the wealth, the land, and all these different things that person had. The unexplained wealth order will allow unexplained wealth by public officials to be given to the people. It goes to the Treasury. So if Ellsworth Johnson at the end of 5 years have $10 million, and I cannot account for where I get it, my disclosures at the end of the year doesn't reveal that I'm a minister. I'm not supposed to be involved in other business. It don't add up. It goes back to the government. It goes to the government. It's put in the public treasury. Separate and aside from that, the government can still look to see whether or not you will be prosecuted. For those who said, Mr. Speaker, for those who said For those who said we have not been working, the Ombudsman Bill will establish an Office of the Ombudsman to investigate and make recommendations related to alleged acts of maladministration. 2000, I think it was 2002, in the F&M manifesto, the Ombudsman was spoken about. Members opposite had spoken about an Ombudsman. But this bill will not present to the Bahamian people legislation without teeth. It will be something to truly assist persons in attacking maladministration in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Your Worship, sorry, why am I saying Your Worship? Mr. Speaker.
He is the judge of the High Court.
Yes, he is. Indeed he is. Indeed he is. Mr. Speaker, I had indicated earlier that we intend to lay a compendium of land bills. The Land Adjudication Bill, the Law of Property Bill, and the Registration of Lands Bill. And I'm very happy that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, who I expect to be leader in a few months, will support, and that comes from the heart. I must admit, oh God, my Keraran, that's the man from Keraran. But you know, when I left law school and the police force decided they didn't want me, it was the deputy leader's brother. They said I was too unruly and uncontrollable. I don't know where they got that from. But it was the deputy leader's brother. And you're quite, I know Mr. Speaker is very familiar with him, who took me in, allowed me to do pupillage. I sat in Angliston's office. I had the awesome experience of meeting Mistress Beryl Hannah to speak about land matters. And even when we did, and that's why I said I wanted to jump to Cat Island, when we were researching the whole history of land in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, I had the distinguished pleasure to sit with Mr. Arthur Dion Hannah, Sr., former Governor General of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, a Bahamian son, and to hear him recount his experience surrounding land and when they were doing that case, how people actually tried to starve them out. Names of islands were changed in this country because of land. People were dispossessed, some of their lives because of land. And this compendium of legislation, it has taken serious courage. And that is why I have great respect for my leader. There are many in this country, Mr. Speaker, who do not want to see a change in the land regime. The Privy Council, our highest court, on a number of occasions have looked at the issue of land in the Bahamas, and it says that the current land regime lends itself to stealing. When you look at places like Linden Estates, where those persons, I remember when the bar did a function, a lady said to me, can you imagine working in the hotel for years and spending all of your money to pay the mortgage, only to find out that you don't own the land? Wow. And so today I wish to quote from Justice Crane Scott when she looks at how land is dealt with in the Bahamas. And she says that the Bahamas judicial system is vulnerable to being used as an unwitting pawn in the commission of real estate fraud. The Privy Council went further to say that the current land regime in the Bahamas lends itself to stealing, to thieving. And why I say that is because I'm from Cat Island. Those ladies were from Cat Island. They took those ladies in a helicopter and flew them all the way to Nassau. But there's one thing my father always had to tell me, always told me, son, I remember this, son. The people who claimed to own the land wasn't in Cat Island, so somebody had to talk. So let them know that they were on the land. And we still have those people who will talk today. But my leader has demonstrated the necessary intestinal fortitude. And I know that everybody in this place, everybody in this place to bring this compendium of legislation and to send it around to the community. Everybody in here can claim some generation property. And I know that the senior attorneys in here will tell you that generation property really has no place in the law.
None.
It's a fiction. And I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong. So people claim what? 500 acres? You're living on a piece? And then someone comes along and they have a good lawyer? How in the world can someone from San Salvador gather $20,000 to fight someone who comes with a high-powered lawyer? They have to take what they give to them. And this type of raping and robbing has been going on for centuries in this country. And it has to stop. And so I'm elated, and my heart leaps, and my heart leaps within me for joy when I hear Anglicans say, and she has no other choice. She's a Hannah. That she will continue the fight, and I'm adding these words, and I'm quite certain that she will not object to them. She will continue the fight that her illustrious and honorable father began when he decided to assist those ladies who had nobody. See, that's where legal aid came from, who had nobody to assist them. He took the resources from his firm and decided to assist them. Mr. Speaker, outside. Huh? 30 minutes? I gotta get some. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence for 1 second, please. I'm just trying to. I don't know if anybody has any point of order.
Is this an opportune time?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, in the speech from the throne, one of the things we recognize, and I've heard this presentation made by Carmichael, my representative, by the way, when he spoke to certain incidents that would have occurred just prior to the election. We intend, and you can see it in the speech from the throne, to introduce the court services bill. The present Chief Justice did not waste any time in looking at the state of the judiciary. As a matter of fact, we sit here, we walk straight across in the back, and you can see the louvers on the courthouse torn off. It is an indication of the deprivation that the judiciary has faced over the years. And I'm not going to stand here and be a hypocrite and to say that it is of recent vintage and it has just occurred in the last 5 years. I will not embarrass my people. I had a conversation with an uncle the other day, and he called me and said, some gentleman by the name of Mr. Bodie is saying something about you. Deal with it. So he's watching today. And so a court services bill. Mr. Speaker, funding, we are a part of the Commonwealth Latimer principles. We have adopted them. And one of those principles underscore the obligation of the executive to provide proper funding for the judiciary so that it can carry out its mandate. Now, I listened to the Minister of National Security, and he articulated that there are some persons who are on bail for 1, 2, 3 serious offenses. But I think we have a low-hanging fruit, and we're going to continue to concentrate on it. If we can provide the necessary resources that the judiciary needs, with the training, that when someone commits an offense, they go to court within a year or within that reasonable time. You don't have to worry about them committing a third or second or a third offense because they would already be tried. Lord Wolf and those wrote about rules of the Supreme Court in civil matters. In civil matters, how you can have these matters progress through the court in a speedy manner. So that is one of the things that my government intends to do and to lay before this honorable house. So anybody who would say that we haven't been working is simply not telling the truth. The public procurement regulations under the Financial Administration and Audit Act, hot off the press, the way how we give out contracts. We've talked about it for years, but our government and my Prime Minister is demonstrating the necessary intestinal fortitude to bring this forth. You know, we've had this discussion before as to how contracts are given out and political patronage. People depend on them. But to bring these regulations and this environment not only suggests, but speaks loudly that we are about our country, about rather than selfish ambitions and selfish desires. The rent to own. My government has spoken about rent to own. And I've heard people talk about the mortgage relief, and you saw that. And I'm going to speak to that. For too long in this country, I'm coming back to rent to own, we have allowed a regime where someone could pay for a mortgage for 25 years. These banks can't do it in Canada and the US. Just come and take your home. Just come and take it. The member who is no longer in this parliament, he's in my constituency. I've always had conversations. He ran for Elizabeth. Help me, please. Malcolm Adley. Mr. Malcolm Adley was in charge of a committee, and we're still looking up that research, which looked, you're saying, Mangrove King? Yes, the banking committee. You know, and we haven't had the courage in this country to deal with this, Mr. Speaker. When I was about to get married, I decided to go through the community to look for a home. And you know what was frightening? And what touched me? The number of Bahamians who are in homes and the bank has already taken it away from them. They're only allowed to be in the home so that it wouldn't waste away for security. So you go and you find a husband, a wife, and children who are getting up day in and day out. And every day they don't know when the banker will come and say leave, and they don't know where they're going to go. There has to be something wrong, and this government has recognized it. And I want to thank members of Parliament who called in to one of the morning shows to speak about it. And there's a lecturer at COB who is educating young Bahamians about it. I can't recall his name at this time. Who is educating people about the wrong banking practices in this country. A gentleman by the name of Mr. George Capron got a check the other day and went to a bank. $16 to cash a check.
Plus VAT.
Plus VAT. That cannot be right. And so for those of you who said that, or who didn't object, one, to the recess, who came back and assisted with the hurricane, and then have the audacity, Put
that down, Angus. You ain't know what you're doing, man. That's a phone.
and then have the, yes, and then, so I, just like the compendium of land bills, I get from Angliston that we're in agreement, we are at Edom on this problem. And the Bar Association has attempted to address it over and over again. If we really want to help Bahamian people, we can straighten land. If we really want to help Bahamian people, we're going to try our best to straighten the situation with the bank. If we really want to help Bahamian people, even with the mortgage corp, we don't allow someone to be in a house. And I've seen it in the U.S. before. For 25 years, and because they got must be 2 more years, you take it away, you make no adjustments, and you sell it. That's unconscionable. Outside, Mr. Speaker, outside of government, we are looking to create greater transparency and accountability in the regulation of non-profits. These organizations have proliferated over the last decade, and we are intent on ensuring that they are not misused for terrorism financing and money laundering. This is why we intend to amend the Companies Act and the Companies Non-Profit Organization Regulations. I want to send out a special thanks. And for those, again, I'm going to harp on this, who say we have not been doing anything and they want to see. I want to thank members from the Christian community, from the Baptist community, the Anglican community, Father Palacios, and all those persons who got together, who sat with us in the hotel room, and who agreed that they will not be a part of any criminal conduct, and they will not allow anybody to set up any nonprofit in the Bahamas. You can't have a church by the name of the Whole My Mule Baptist Church, and nobody knows how you get your funds. We are not intending to get into the inner sanctum of your institution. But all we simply want to know is once you certify by an accountant that everything is okay, that's okay. Because we have international obligations to meet. And the best way I can say it is this. We have loved ones who travel around the world. We have loved ones who travel around the world. And as ungodly as 9/11 was, you know what they found? That there were non-profits that were holding those funds to commit terrorism acts. And we have to do something about it. So I want to commend the religious community for coming forward, for discussing. And you know what they said to us? You know, when you do things, do it with courtesy and respect. We like the way you all call us. We like the way you explained it. We like the courtesy that you've demonstrated toward us, and we are prepared to play our part. So for those who said we have not been working, they've seen, and they've even filled out the forms. And we're going to bring that legislation to this Parliament to have it done very shortly.
Listen to the church. We listen to the church. We follow what the church says. We listen.
Mr. Speaker, before I conclude, I would like to extend condolences to the family of Enid Ferguson. That house had 13 votes. And she was challenged. She had one leg, but I could always remember going in there and having that lady pull me into her front room. And I think all of us have had this experience. And the burden was very hard, walking up and down. I thank God that Mr. Obama didn't have to go to every house in the Florida Panhandle because he'd still be there. But I'm quite saying, but we have to walk to the houses and to meet someone who invites you into their humble abode. And it's not a house, it's a home. And have a chat with you, encourage you, and tell you how things, whether or not you make it, I support you. That was so touching. So I want to just extend kind condolences to her. I would also like to extend kind condolences to Mr. Bradley Pratt, D.N. Pratt, and Oswald Pratt on the passing of wife and mother respectively. May God continue to bless them during this time of their bereavement. Mr. Speaker, before I conclude, I would like to say a few words about our work in the great constituency of Yamacraw. In the great constituency of Yamacraw. Since I've earned the privilege of representing the people of Yamacraw, we have already held our first town hall meeting specifically focused on creating dialogue on the issue of governance. And so I would like to thank Dame Joan Sawyer, former President of the Court of Appeal, Mr. Alfred Stewart, Matt Albury, and what we insist on when we come to have public consultation is real public consultation. So we don't select our speakers because we expect you to say what the FNM wants to hear. So you might very well find that we will do a public consultation. I'm going to solicit somebody right now. Angliston may want to sit on a Angliston, because of a wealth of knowledge, may want to sit on a panel to really discuss the compendium of land bills, and to hear the issues concerning land, and to say where we are to take it in the 21st century, and how we have done a disservice to the Bahamian community by just having this communication right now. So I want to thank those persons who spoke on good governance and how it is to be achieved. It was hot, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our back to school program hosted over 100 students. And what we have done, I want to commend the Prime Minister for insisting, and I'm going to suggest that this is something that and I know that it is being done, but the opposition can partner in. If we want to change our communities, we have to be there. We have to tell our stories of humble beginnings. our trials, our failures that have caused us to be success with young children. And so what we had to do was go back to the schools in the community, meet with the principal. I had to meet with the principal from Thelma Gibson and from the principal from Doris Johnson, and become actively involved in it. And not just actively involved in it, by insisting that mothers and fathers play an active role in these schools. Crime in the Bahamas and the main, especially violent crimes, are being committed by persons between the age of 14 and let's say about 30 or 25. They're people that we know. We have to involve ourselves in the community. So we have decided, we have started to do that. We've created a girls' club. We're in the process of creating a boys' club and a band. And I'm happy to say to the Minister of Finance that we will be able to account for our $100,000. Yamakra has also taken a critical role in the National Cleanup Campaign, fully adopting the International Day theme. And what we've done is the International Day of the Environment theme is connecting people to the environment. And we just said that Yamakra is connecting people to the environment. I would like to congratulate the member for Marathon and the members for St. Barnabas. I don't know how St. Barnabas gets out there in the hot sun with his suit on and his tie, but he don't twist it. And I was so happy because we were intending in Yamakra to bring out this weekend, we were going to put out all the dumpsters and go through. We told the young men, wait, listen, I didn't throw the garbage in the front of your yard, and so you're going to come out and clean it. And so they had decided to come out and assist. But when I drove through yesterday, I was surprised because almost everything was removed. A part of the National Cleanup Campaign is because a court will be established. All those derelict vehicles, we're dealing with that in Yamakra. I also want to say that there's something, a sinister thing that's creeping across this island, and it's coming into Yamakra. And we're going to deal with town planning. And you see irregular buildings, garages, tire shops. These things totally in contravention of restrictive covenants. You know, and we have to do something about it. We have to clean up this place. And what disheartens me is the majority of us come from over the hill. The majority of us come from over the hill. And you know, when I was 4, I went to Cat Island. When I come back, the place, it hasn't changed. And we have to be able to insist that our citizenry keep the place clean, that we don't just build how we want to build, turn loud music on when we feel like. I don't know where this culture comes from, that you bring out the speakers and just blast people away. It's disrespectful. And we have to do something with it. So I encourage and I support the National Cleanup Campaign. Mr. Speaker, as for young people in the Yamakra, we have started, but I said that we have started the Boys Club and we have started the Girls Club. And I'd just like to read from the speech room where the speech from the throne.
Yeah, I'm back now.
And I would just like to reiterate this, where it's specifically focused on young people. Listen, I don't hide the fact that I didn't finish school. I don't hide the fact where I came from or who I am. That is what made me the person that I am. And we have to be mentors to our children. I'm happy that I met people like Boston Blackie. I'm happy that I met Angliston's brother, Mr. Arthur Dionhala. I'm happy that I met Eris Monta. And I'm happy that I met Ms. Gail Wisdom. But you know what they were able to do? They were able to look at what they saw as potential. And sometimes we meet young persons, and they may be doing nonsense. You have to be able to look them in the eye and say, you're doing nonsense. But this is what I see in you. And this is what our government, here I go again. And this is what our government is doing. We are looking at young people, we are seeing their potential, and we are daring to pull that out of them. And so, no. No. So that's what we're daring to do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've earned the privilege to serve Yamakra, and I'm working to keep that privilege. Mr. Speaker, I hope I have been able to paint a clear picture for the Bahamian people of a government holding fast to the values it promised to bring back to politics and government. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that in the speech from the throne, the Bahamian heard a promise that, pardon? The Bahamians heard a promise, and that with the help of God, we will be able to bring those through. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we think this is, yeah, he took the,
Oh,
did
sorry.
he recognize him?
No. The chair recognizes the honorable member for South Andres.
North Andres.
Central.
North. Not no south. North Andres.
Central and South Andres.
Not South Andres.
Huh?
South Andres.
North
yeah.
Andres. Okay.
North Andres and
The member
Berry
for
Islands.
North Andres and the Berry Islands.
You got it.
My apologies. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, us Andros men are oftentimes very particular from which side do we descend. Always two. But, Mr. Speaker, this is an appropriate place, I think, for us to suspend. And so I move that the House suspends until October the 4th, 2017, at 10 a.m.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House suspend until October 4th, 2017.
Wednesday.
As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. The business of the House is suspended to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 4th of October, 2017.